Gwen Robinson, we come to you. You spent a lot of time there as a journalist, researcher, even a kind of a resident in some ways.
Part-time.
And what do you think? And where is it going? You know, you've been there, but where do you think it's going now?
Well, thanks, Thitinan, and just to add to your introduction, yeah, I first started covering Myanmar about 8 years ago as a correspondent for the Financial Times, and about 4 years ago moved across to the Nikkei Asian Review, which ultimately Nikkei bought the Financial Times, so I suppose it's all the same family now. And I have watched Myanmar over those years go through its various phases. None, of course, are as disturbing as what we've seen in the past year. But I'd like to remind, for those, I think there's quite a few people in this room who have been to Myanmar. In fact, some are frequent visitors. Others may not have been at all. For those who haven't been to Yangon lately, and you may have read this, but I have to say it again, you would really never know, and last year you never would have known, that part of the country was going up in flames and people were being, tortured, expelled, villages were being razed to the ground. There is absolutely no sense in the cities in Myanmar that anything is going on, and if it is reported, many Burmese who make up the majority of the country's 53 to 54 million population think it's fine. There is a deeply ingrained feeling that of threat and insecurity about the presence of not just Muslim communities, but particularly the Rohingya communities who have long been regarded as outsiders, always been denied citizenship. So it's really very shocking at dinner parties or wherever in Yangon where some urbane, educated Burmese will pipe up and tell you why they never did belong and it's just as well to get rid of them. You can't argue with these, this sort of narrative. Lately, I think what's become more disturbing is that the West's reactions, rather than actually helping the situation in terms of bringing the Myanmar leadership or in fact military on board to actually, rectify some of the outrages, has fueled further resentment. So these days when I go to Myanmar, often you'll get a very strong feeling amongst a lot of Burmese, including educated, intelligent business people, academics, that, this is all very unfair, the world doesn't understand. I mean, I get people insisting that they won't say the word Rohingya generally, they're called Bengalis, making it all up, that these human rights abuses are largely fabricated, and that when you say, what about 650,000 people fleeing? Oh, well, they are just pretending that they've had problems so that they can get resettlement and become refugees and go to America or wherever. So that is really the feeling, I think. That's something that I think has not really sunk into the West, how ingrained these feelings are in Myanmar. But what I really wanted to focus on is really about the economy and how the economic issues and fallout from the Rakhine crisis, or not just fallout, the consequences of, are also feeding into the whole political situation and the way Myanmar is possibly repositioning itself and shifting, I think, really away from the West into the arms of the East and countries that simply either don't care or won't condemn the country for any of this stuff. So first, to look at the economic impact of the Rakhine crisis, the first thing I would like to do is counter these dire warnings that this will sink the economy, drive tourists away, scare off foreign investment. In fact, with a lot of the articles I've read, I almost get the sense there's some wishful thinking among some. who feel that Myanmar deserves punishment and maybe deserves an economic crisis or to see foreign investment flee the country. In fact, GDP growth for Myanmar is not only well on track, but it's actually even better than expected at the moment, with growth reaching 6.4% or so in 2017, which is quite a nice leap from 5.9% in 2016. And the IMF has recently forecast that the economy is expected to grow this year, the 2018 financial year, that's till March the 31st, by 6.7%. So, you know, that gives you an idea that there's stuff going on there that certainly doesn't come through in all the gloom and doom and warnings. Now, why is that? Why has Myanmar's economy grown in the last year when we've had the impression that it's all on fire and in crisis? I mean, there's many hidden factors, but that includes higher tax revenues that the government is finally getting after a dysfunctional system for decades under military rule. More foreign investment, and yes, there is more foreign investment going on even in the last 8 months, with some very big investments in companies. Obviously, oil and gas as well is still a big draw card, but you're seeing a shifting nature of foreign investment. Again, I'll come back to that, but a lot more is now, there's a lot more engagement from Asian countries, and a revival of the garment industry, for example, which was almost destroyed under Western sanctions in early 2000. That's also becoming more robust. So overall, foreign investment, in fact, reached more than $5 billion by December. So that's nearly 90% of the government's target for this last financial year. I think there are some real concerns in the government. They are not stupid, and they are well aware that the West is now condemning the US as Congress is trying to impose sanctions, which, again, not necessarily scares Naypyidaw. It probably fuels the anger or resentment, but anyway, America has managed so far to just put one general on a blacklist. So I think that kind of also sends a signal to Myanmar that maybe they're safe for now, that Congress's rhetoric and efforts to impose sanctions and revive blacklists for, at the moment, are probably being overridden by a more pragmatic, believe it or not, attitude by a rather erratic White House and President. So, you know, there's some of the things to consider. The other thing to consider is that agricultural returns have really improved. Agriculture consists of a lot of the country's economy, and that also goes for Rakhine. There are a lot of farmers, and a lot of the Rohingya, in fact, were farming the lands. This is another issue that I'll come to later, because now they've all gone. I think the Rakhine situation in particular is going to face some challenges, but overall, Myanmar's agriculture has improved steadily and is rapidly improving as more inputs come in. There's been huge amounts of foreign aid organisations funding and help to farmers. So, you know, on top of that, as I said, you've got garments and light manufactured goods. And also, it has to be said, after much foot dragging, the Myanmar government has finally begun to get its act together on economic reforms with the passage of some key laws, which again are drawing foreign investment interest. Not necessarily, I think Western companies are becoming much more wary because of the Rakhine situation, but you're getting a lot of non-Western companies attracted by a new law that enables, for the first time ever, foreign investors to acquire up to 35% of a Myanmar company. Up to now, it has been complete limits for any foreigner to invest in a Myanmar company. Otherwise, that company then becomes a foreign company. So, you know, these are things to keep in mind. And also, maybe there's partly a lag effect after in the year that we saw this conflagration in Rakhine. But meanwhile, these projects and plans have gotten underway, including big new infrastructure plans, roads, power plants. Now, some of this and some of the international organisations have reconsidered funding plans. Very few have been totally cancelled, but we may see more of that coming ahead. And again, I think that'll feed into some, you know, deep-seated resentments in Naypyidaw that the West is out to get them. So really, the upshot of all this is what you might call a pivot in Myanmar from a look west policy that began under, I think, the pro-reform administration, the first post-junta administration run by President Thein Sein from 2011, who then opened up the country, looked west, and now what we're saying it actually is, I think, a pivot back to the east with a bigger embrace of China, ironically, under the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi, and also, let's not forget, Japan, which has shown unfailing eagerness to get more and more involved. So they're the two big players, China and Japan, but you're seeing, as Kavi mentioned, greater engagement from Singapore, ASEAN countries, and Thailand, which actually ranks as the second or third biggest foreign investor in Myanmar, which is way under the radar. And there's a thriving border trade, but also the biggest deal that has been done in Myanmar in recent times is a Thai company, Kuncharun at Thai Bev, sinking nearly $1 billion into a Thai Myanmar drinks company. So, you know, there's deals and support, and also a very close relationship with Thailand. So these are some factors to keep in mind. And the other myth, I think, that is taking hold of all these articles I'm seeing, that tourism is going to collapse. Tourism was the great success of recent years in Myanmar. I think tourist arrival figures went from something ridiculous like 30,000 in the darkest years, and this year they were targeting 3 million. In fact, last year was close to 2 million or around then visitors. So there have been many Western cancellations. A lot of Westerners do not want to go to Myanmar for their happy holidays. And this was highlighted recently by an unfortunate tweet by a Canadian diplomat of a beautiful, deserted, pristine beach in Rakhine State, saying, "What a great place to have a holiday." Well, there was such a bad reaction to that tweet, and it just showed how toxic Myanmar may become as a holiday destination for, say, Western tourists. However, there is a very strong and increasing surge of Chinese and other Asian tourists, and I think some clever plans to remarket Myanmar possibly to Asian tourists, and also, let's not forget, Russians, Israelis, and many others who don't really, condemn a country for these shocking human rights violations. But anyway, I think I should maybe finish up here, and hopefully we'll have some questions and more talk after that. Thank you.
Gwen, you have alluded to an issue that I think Ambassador Laetitia also alluded to, referred to. So I have two quick follow-ups. One, and I invite anyone in the room to also entertain this challenge, this daunting task. How do we get? I mean, in Burma, in Myanmar, in any country you have disagreements. In Thailand, very polarized. U.S. polarized. In Myanmar, they agree on one thing. They don't like the Muslims in Rakhine.
Right.
They don't accept the term Rohingya. They call them Bengalis. So what you're saying is that we're going to see further alienation and isolation of Naypyidaw, of the Myanmar government. When you have more Western condemnation, they're going to close ranks, tighten, go deeper into their bunker, But then they have this notion, this really deep-seated, almost in the blood, that the Rohingyas, they don't belong there. There's this deep hostility. So how do we, anyone, convince them otherwise? Burmeseness, it goes back centuries. Second question, and for anyone too, what's the West to do? I mean, West, you got China. China is the biggest game changer around here. The West does too much. Myanmar has China, Cambodia has China, Thailand has China, everybody has China. Yet, what's happening there is unpalatable to not just the media, but Western governments and so on. So what's the Western governments to do, and how do we kind of tweak or help convince the Burmese about their Burmeseness to see it in other ways?
They're two extremely difficult questions, which I would typically expect from you, Dr. Thitinan. But I think the first one about convincing them, convincing the Burmese that the West you will not convince them by lecturing. And again, I think we're back to shades of the debate, the very fierce debate in the late 1980s, early 90s about sanctions per se. And can I remind people that Aung San Suu Kyi back in the early 90s was, as a political prisoner, was the most vocal about supporting sanctions and wanting sanctions against the country to punish the country. And I think now I hear echoes of those debates now. And sanctions, as I pointed out, particularly, I think the big game changer now is exactly as you say, China's there, and not just China. I think that Japan is a very important factor in Myanmar, and in fact what we're seeing is a looming struggle, I think, over this region between China, Japan, and to a lesser extent India, plus, as small players, bit players, ASEAN countries. And these are all Asian, and there won't be that compulsion. So I think basically through sanctions, outrage, punitive action, I think the West is losing leverage. But that is not saying, I'm not saying that the West cannot. It has to. There is no way, I think, any Western government could swallow all this and not mention it and cozy up to a regime that is basically responsible for some really crimes against humanity.
Okay, Laetitia?
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that, because it's not only about the West. Myanmar has created a regional problem, right?
Yeah.
And it has been doing so for a long time. The first wave of refugees into Bangladesh was in 1978, and we've had this revolving door. And not only the revolving door, but you have 120,000 in Malaysia, you have, including the earlier waves, 1 million in Bangladesh, you have 400,000 in Saudi Arabia, you have 200,000 in Pakistan. There are a lot of countries that are getting quite upset about this. And I think that's why it's so important that Singapore succeeds in trying to build bridges. You're seeing the beginnings of that might, because what has happened is that should have happened many years earlier. The Rohingya have started to radicalize. Surprise, surprise. This was to be foreseen. So the region also should say, perhaps
Sorry, can I just say I should have mentioned? That I really should have mentioned. The other division is between the Islamic countries. So that's a new rift between Islamic and Buddhist countries.
Yes, no, I think fair enough. The regional countries have more immediate stakes here than countries further away. I'm just looking at the broader picture as well. If you look at this map, you'll see, the relationship between core and periphery, right? So the core of Myanmar, Burma, is really around the Mandalay, the old Eva, and then the periphery, all these ethnic minorities. If you look at Thailand, normally displacements, people's displacements, IDPs, asylum seekers, refugees, and so on, normally they happen around here. It's Thailand. Vietnamese, Cambodians, the Karens, the Shans. But now you have this massive deportations, displacements on the Myanmar-Bangladesh border, over 650,000. So, Dr.Supang, we come to you now. What do you see? How do you impart some of the lessons, experiences from this side to that side?
Thank you, Thitinan. I think that we have heard a lot from other speakers about what happened there. I would like to focus more on the issue of refugee and possible solutions. First, we have to consider the three countries, Thailand, Myanmar, and Bangladesh, as the countries within the international migration corridor, because this is not something new. Rohingya from Bangladesh moved into Myanmar for centuries, and in the 1970s, 80s, they were repatriated back to Bangladesh through UNHCR, and it was not a success because many could not live in Cox's Bazar, they couldn't have livelihood, and finally they returned to Myanmar. On the Thailand-Myanmar side, we also see the flows of people who escaped from violence since the 90s. Kachin, Karen, not many Kachin, Karen, Kareni, and Shan, and Mon moved across the border to Thailand. And even now we have 9 refugee camps along the border. So this is not something new. And we can consider this corridor as the place where people will move back and forth. But this time, because of the number, we said 600,000 people crossing from Myanmar to the northern part of okay, just the arrow. Okay, so from the northern part of Rakhine state, moving into Bangladesh, and that's back to Cox's Bazar, where they were once sent back. And in this case, what you can do some analysis with this massive flows of people. Now we go back to the root cause of conflict, because as refugee we said that they escape from violence, from armed conflict, and all kinds of discrimination. When General Ne Win announced the policy of Arakanization of the Arakan state, that was apart from the old history, because it means that Arakan state will be for Arakan people, and those who are non-Arakan people will not be included. And this is supported by General Min Aung Hlaing. In an interview, he told the media that ethnic lives in this country but not built it. So ethnic people are allowed to live here, but they are not the one who build the nation. And they have to know what is the limit of their status. And from that period, the Rohingya were not included in Rakhine state as national. But more recently, in 2015, just 2 years ago, in the national census, population census, Rohingya was the group that supposed to be included in the enumeration, in the population census. The official from Myanmar government told me that they started to enumerate them, and with the origin as Bengali. But the Rohingya refused. They said that if you enumerate us in the census, you need to enumerate us as Rohingya and not as Bengali. According to the national law in Myanmar, Bengali are considered to be people that are entitled to citizenship, but Rohingya is another term. But because of the Rohingya refused to be counted as Bengali, that's how they were excluded. It is not because the government didn't want to include them, but they themselves insisted that they would like to be considered as Rohingya. So from this, you can see that how the conflict can lead to further violence later on. Now that people move into Bangladesh, 600,000 people, and we said that it is a kind of religious discrimination. You think about the 5 causes of determining people's status as refugee because of race, religion, nationality, social group. But we need to know that among those people, there are 6,500 Hindus who also moved with the group. They were living in Rakhine state, in Myeongdong area, and they escaped because they were afraid of the ASA. So this is not the plight of the Muslim, purely Muslim people. It is a combination of people who are not only Muslim, but they also escape from violence. And now they are ready to come back. And this is what I would like to further discuss, that what can be done now that they are there. Of course, to assist big group of people like this, humanitarian assistance, including the International Red Cross, the Thai Red Cross, Ajahn Tate, who is here, and other countries in ASEAN are now trying to help those people. Thinking about this changing weather, people in the tent, how can they live and survive? And among those people, 60,000 orphans who need more protection. So with that, we think about the possible durable solutions, right? The 3 things. UNHCR has already started to survey the people in Cox's Bazar area, who they are, and that should be a good database to serve in case they are to be repatriated, because you know their origin. In the agreement that many people say that it is a show in the gallery because not very realistic. Myanmar government said that those people must have national verification, some proof that they used to live in Rakhine state and they want to come back. And that's not easy to prove 600,000 people. That's a long process. But with that, some groups, those who would like to come back, like the 6,000 Hindus, as I mentioned, if they would like to come back, let them come. A kind of spontaneous repatriation can start. You don't need to have the huge thing like what happened in the Cambodian repatriation 20 years ago. And there are some priority groups like the orphans that should be focused. How you can look at those people, those children, they are unaccompanied, their parents died during the plight, and who will be responsible for that? This question will go to the region as well as the international community response, UN, like UNICEF, and ICRC, and other international and regional responsibility. So that's the first thing about spontaneous repatriation before possible or impossible repatriation of the massive group. Second, talking about local integration, which is staying in Bangladesh. This is possible, but at a very low scale, because they were once there and they could not survive. That's why they crossed the border back to the older generation, not the young one. Among the young one, they said that Myanmar is their homeland, and they were forced to leave their homeland to Bangladesh, while the older generation, their homeland was in Bangladesh, and they refuged to Myanmar and were repatriated back. So this is a very paradoxical situation, that Once they were refugee in Myanmar, and then another time they are refugee in Bangladesh. Same group, but different generation and different global context of refugee situation. We have to recognize that we are in a different global context. Now, most countries do not want to take those people for local settlement or for resettlement as in the past. So I don't think that the Bangladeshi government would expect to take all those 600,000 in Bangladesh. And they would try very hard in order to facilitate them to go back. And if we look at Myanmar government, the agreement said that they are willing to take those people back with some conditions. And such condition, it is not really, can be accomplished overnight. Looking at the 100,000 refugees at the Thai border, we have discussed about repatriation for 3 years already. But up until now, only a pilot group of 60 people were repatriated with UNHCR witness, and some thousand spontaneous repatriation. But the rest are still in the camp. So how can we expect that those in Cox's Bazar area can come back to Myanmar easily without a huge amount of resources and preparation? How they can come back, what kind of livelihood they are going to have, and what kind about citizenship. For citizenship, I agree with Madam Ambassador about this issue, because it means access to land and livelihood. And with that, it must be, and Myanmar government agree that they will grant citizenship to those who return. That's easy to say, but difficult to do. With that, we have to discuss with the Rohingya too, that if they want to be Myanmar citizen, under what condition they would require. Like in the last population census, they refused to be included already. And for this time, what will be the condition? So if they have access to citizenship, and now in this world, there is no single citizenship, we have to learn that there are many layers of citizenship. Okay? Many countries, including the Soviet Union or in Thailand or the EU countries, they learn how to have different status for different types of citizenship. Here in Thailand, for example, there are Rohingyas who have been living here for more than 10 years. And now they got a Thai card, not a citizenship card, but a card which is called a person with no registration status. And with that, they are allowed to stay in Thailand for 10 years. And this card can be renewed every 10 years. And with that, they can work, they can have healthcare access, they can have education access. So what would you need? This is not citizenship, but it is quasi of citizenship to address a statelessness problem. So the Myanmar government need to learn, and I think that technically ASEAN and others should help them to think, because they may be very straightforward, either or. Okay, and with that, the smoother entrance into the citizenship issue should be a thing to think about. For resettlement, I think that this is very unlikely. If you ask ASEAN countries, they would prefer to donate rather than to take. Malaysia has taken a lot already. And even Indonesia in Aceh area, in Thailand, as a case I mentioned, all ones already exist here. Because the Rohingya have been in the region not only a year ago, they have been here for more than 20 years. If you look into the refugee camp in Thailand, there is a section of the Rohingya. They were there already, more than 20 years ago. This is not new. So talking about resettlement, who will take them? The EU don't want to take them. They have so many already. And you know that the EU asylum policy since 1990s play the role of country of first asylum only. So people can come, but you are asylum seeker here, and you need to find a country to resettle. And if you cannot find a country to resettle, you have to go back. That's a new policy. So that's why I think that resettlement of this big group of people is not a durable solution that we can expect. Among the three solutions, repatriation on one hand and local settlement on the other hand. And for that, we need to see the possibilities. Now, talking about repatriation, some kinds of economic development in the states of ethnic minorities. This is something that we always recommend. Foreign direct investment will focus mainly in Yangon area, like in Tilawa. You can confirm, right? But if you say that you have SEZ in current state, you have SEZ in Rakhine state, but nobody would invest there because the government has not encouraged investment to go there. They would prefer that it is in the state, in the division that the government can have control. And with that, the economic condition in those states where ethnic minorities are living will continue to be like that, and it will not be enabling for any livelihood in the future. Okay, so I stop for the first round here that economic development in those states should be the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you. ขอบคุณครับอาจารย์ Okay, the floor is open for questions, comments. We have about close to a half hour.
The question is really addressed to Ms.Gwen Robinson. So a lot of foreign media has come under attack for, being biased about this issue. But how do you think that foreign media can actually write about this issue? Is there a way for foreign media to write about it in a truthful manner that can please both sides?
What you mean, is there a way to write about it in a truthful manner without looking biased or being biased?
Indeed.
Yeah, well, it's clear that the facts alone speak for themselves. So, I do notice that in Western media, it's full of adjectives, which of course is natural, I think, for Western media. When you see a horrific situation, you're going to say horrific or appalling or atrocious or... but the other thing is, I think there's this perception and this use of the term foreign media. You're talking about Western media. We're talking about Western media. Have you seen Japanese media? Have you seen Chinese media? You're not getting this kind of level of emotionalism. Understandably in some cases, but that's not to say that every Asian country is kind of like supporting or condoning. I think, though, that there is a tendency in Western media, which I've seen over, and I think Kavi will support me in this, which is that, there is a tendency to give vent to emotionalism, and I've got some colleagues in the audience there who might have views. BBC and others are playing to a certain kind of viewer, and there's pressure to give an opinion, an element of opinion. So I find if I was writing for even the Financial Times, it's difficult not to put in a couple of, adjectives, because people will think, you don't think this is horrendous? You can stand by and interview a refugee whose entire family's been killed, who's lost everything, and not cast it in a sympathetic light. But the other division, I think, is the Islamic versus non-Islamic world as well, and you've seen Al Jazeera versus, say, some of the other. I think it is possible to be completely unbiased by sticking to the facts, and the facts really speak for themselves on this situation.
I'm Deza. I'm from MACE program, student from Chulalongkorn University. What access? Whatever I'm here to credit on this issue, I've never heard about the perspective of internet people. But when I talk about the internet people, not only Burmese people, when we see and dig in Myanmar, now currently so-called 135 ethnic people, but mainly major ethnic people. How about these ethnic people main concern on this Rohingya issue, or how these ethnic people perspective on this issue, the resistance on this issue? Because in Myanmar, when we see the Myanmar, we have many political implications about the ethnic issue. So I didn't see about to finding what are the main concern of the internet people.
Okay, you're asking what are the perspectives of the other ethnic minority groups in Myanmar, right?
Yeah,
towards this issue.
On this issue.
Right. So like the Chins, Kachins, the okay.
I think it's an important point. I think, as has been suggested, and correctly, I think that the general view among many in Myanmar is not very positive about the Rohingya. You can talk about how that came about and whether those are opinions that are have been formed in a responsible manner. And it is, of course, in a democratic society, these kinds of things get discussed. Unfortunately, that is not happening, at least not in a manner that will help to find a way forward. A lot of the discussion I have found is based on history. I can assure you, I have sat through at least 10 hours of briefings by people, by 10 or 12 different people, who tried to explain to us their perspective on the history of the Rohingya and the Rakhine in Myanmar. In the end, we concluded, and it's in our report, that these are clashing historical narratives. That you are not going, and they are being held very close by people because that's because they feel that protects them. They are not willing, or it's difficult for them to become a bit looser and to say, now how can we, and that's what I mentioned also in my brief presentation, how can we move forward? What does it mean to be a Myanmar citizen in this day and age? The fact that you have to go back to 1825 and your grand and great-great-great-grandparents have to have lived in Myanmar at that time before you qualify for citizenship is something that, quite frankly, bewilders a lot of people around the world. It's, Myanmar's right to choose that kind of a system, but it is a system that excludes people rather and looks back at history rather than opening up and looking forward. What is it that we want? I cannot provide that answer. I don't want to provide that answer. But that's why I said they really need a national debate about what it means to be a citizen of that country in this day and age, and then move forward and try to develop a more inclusive approach. But it's their prerogative to do that.
Tisha, is it the case that Myanmar has many ethnic conflicts, but when it comes to this Rohingya, even the other ethnic minorities, the Karen, the Shans, the Mons, and so on, they kind of agree they don't like the Rohingya. Is that the case?
It's good that you ask that, because it's been very interesting, after 25 August. The first group that spoke out was the Karen Women's Union. The Karen Women's Union boldly spoke out and said, hey, we understand what is happening because it's happening to us. It is not unique that the Tatmadaw, the armed forces, deal with the population in a certain way. We recognize it, we understand, we grieve with you. Then it took a while, and then the KNU also spoke out, and others started to speak out. That doesn't mean that is the general feeling among all the ethnic groups, but it was telling that they were saying, they weren't saying you are one of us, and that's a different matter, but they were saying, we see what is happening to you, and we grieve with you. This should not be happening. So you really have to be aware that the policies and the practices of the armed forces that we have seen rolled out in Rakhine State are the kind of practices and policies that have been practiced in other parts of the country for decades. It's not new.
Thank you, Dr. Thitinan. I'm sorry I came in a bit late, but I would like to thank the ISIS for organizing this forum, public forum rather, and currently I'm in Thailand, and I'm very pleased that the Thai government or the ISIS and the Chulalongkorn University is taking interest in the issue, and you have a very impressive panel there, so let me congratulate you on that. I'm particularly pleased to see the member of the Rakhine Commission, Ambassador Assum. I just caught the last, I was actually listening to Dr.Supang's, intervention, and I thank her for all the comments made about the, complexity of the problem. But I would like to put on record a few facts here, and I would like to also make some comments in the form of comments for the forum. First of all, I would like
Ambassador,
Yes.
normally I wouldn't allow this, I will allow it, but is it very long? If you want to read a statement.
Unfortunately, Dr. Thitinan, the biggest victim and the stakeholder to this problem is Bangladesh. And of course, I would have liked to see that you would give a floor to Bangladesh to speak. But since this is, I have about, I presume, 5 minutes, and then I can
Go ahead, please.
Make a few points, if you allow me. Well, of course, everybody knows here that the biggest brunt of this problem that's been suffered is by Bangladesh, and I'd like to put on record some corrections of the facts. Bangladesh was born in 1971, and since 1971 until 2018, there hasn't been any Bangladeshi of any ethnicity, of Rohingya, of others, have crossed over to Myanmar. May I please correct this and put this on record? And you can put this on record, and this is the official position of the Bangladesh government, because we haven't received any diplomatic note. If from one country to another country, including Thailand, if you had found an illegal Bangladeshi, you would have given us a diplomatic note that we have found this person who's claiming to be Bangladeshi, who may have held a Bangladeshi passport, and he's lost his passport and he's illegal in Thailand. Please take him back. We haven't received any note from Myanmar government to that effect, and to our record and record of Bangladesh Embassy in Yangon, there hasn't been a single Bangladeshi citizen who has crossed over to Myanmar, including any Rohingya from Bangladesh. I've heard the narrative that, there have been interchange, there have been people who have moved from Bangladesh side to Myanmar and from, no. It has only been people who have moved from Myanmar into Bangladesh, from the Rakhine state. And in 1978, the first 200,000 came into independent Bangladesh. We had a bilateral agreement, which is a bilateral legal document between the two governments, in which the Myanmar government recognizes the Rohingyas as the lawful residents of Myanmar. That's exactly the terminology. It's a historic document and legal document. So they recognize the Rohingyas as the lawful residents of Myanmar. And then in 1992, and they had taken every single Rohingya back, recognizing that they're nationals. In 1992, when the second bout of Rohingyas were persecuted and they entered into Bangladesh en masse, 250,000, they were recognized in the agreement of 1992, the one that Her Excellency Aung San Suu Kyi has referred to, that's been taken as the basis of the current arrangement that we have signed. It's the agreement of 1992 in which the Rohingyas were recognized as the members of Myanmar society and residents of Myanmar. So I would like to make sure that this forum takes into notice our position and the historical fact that no Rohingya has gone from Bangladesh into Myanmar, but only Rohingyas from Myanmar, the source and the root of the domestic problem there, they have come to Bangladesh. Currently, between the period of August 2017 and currently January, in the first 3 months, 500,000 Rohingyas had run in the fear of their lives to Bangladesh because their houses were burned down. There was systematic violation of human rights there. It was recognized in the report of the Yangi Lee, the Special Rapporteur for the High Commissioner for Human Rights. There was a resolution of the UN General Assembly that recognizes the systematic violations that have taken place, and hence people have been forcibly displaced, and they had to enter Bangladesh. Bangladesh being a responsible member of the international community and a humanitarian country where we had been refugees in India during our war of liberation. 10 million Bangladeshis went into India as refugees, then we came back. We understand the plight of these people. Our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, being a responsible statesperson and a leader of this world and a responsible country, head of government, she has given shelter and to those very, very distressed people. Currently, by now, there are 700,000 Rohingyas that had entered Bangladesh since August 2015. After the Rwanda crisis, this is the fastest movement of people within a period of 3 months. And this is unprecedented. We urge the international community, including Thailand, which is the closest neighbor to Myanmar, and we urge upon everyone not to consider this as a bilateral problem. This is a regional and a problem and complex problem of international dimension. This is creating regional instability. This is setting an extremely unacceptable example of impunity. When the international community speaks in one voice, when rights of minorities are violated anywhere in the world, including in Bangladesh, if one Hindu was persecuted in Bangladesh, no one would sit quiet. So we say that let's create an inclusive society in Rakhine State in Myanmar. I have listened to the perspective of Ambassador Assam, where people who are there since 1825 or before. This is not acceptable. Myanmar was created in 1948. In the Constitution of Myanmar of 1948, which was drafted by the father of Her Excellency Aung San Suu Kyi, General Aung San, Rohingyas were recognized as an ethnic minority of Myanmar. This is a historical document. You can look it up. And then, in the legal documents between the two countries, they were clearly recognized. Now, Bangladesh currently we are always preferring to resolve this matter through diplomatic negotiations. We have been engaged with Myanmar. We are currently, there have been 3 sets of negotiations right now after these people had come into Bangladesh. First was in November, where we have signed an arrangement. I know that I've heard comments that it's impossible for them to repatriate, but we'd like to reiterate and reaffirm our position. Every single Rohingya should be taken back by Myanmar government. The question is, and then we have had the joint working group created last December. In the joint working group, we will discuss the modalities. There's the terms of reference, and we would like the international community to be very much involved, including the UNHCR in this process, because that is how we did it in 1978, in 1992. Such large populations, nearly 1 million, their movement will not be possible, or repatriation, without engagement of the UNHCR. And lastly, I would like to mention the challenges. Why would the Rohingyas go back there? The question is that there has to be a safe, secure, and congenial environment created in Rakhine State. And perhaps it's responsibility for the ASEAN and also the international community, because Bangladesh bilaterally cannot interfere in the internal matters of Myanmar. It has to be an internationally consensus-true process where resolutions were adopted at the UN General Assembly, voted by 135 members. There were resolutions of the Human Rights Council, there are Security Council statements, there is Secretary General statement, and we hope there'll be ASEAN statement as well. And I particularly urge upon the international community, which is present here, including the Kofi Annan Commission member. We urge upon the ISIS, when we create this kind of public forum, factual and historical facts should be referred to. And I would particularly flag again that Bangladesh is not afraid to shelter the Rohingyas. We simply don't have the capacity. We are a country which is the most densely populated country in the world. Our Cox's Bazar has no environment at this point. It is completely deforested. And our ethnic minorities, who are Buddhist minorities in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, they've been threatened by the large presence of Rohingyas. So we would like to urge upon the Myanmar government and the international community that we are willing to engage in any kind of dialogue. We are doing that with Myanmar. Our Foreign Secretary is traveling to Myanmar on 15th for the first meeting of the Joint Working Group, where we discuss the modalities of the repatriation process. So at this point, we hope that there will be an inclusive world, there will be an inclusive society. And international media has a great responsibility to play in this result, and we thank them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Leah Emanuel. I'm one of the MAIDS program students, and here from Sydney University.
Sorry, it's a Master of Arts in International Development Studies of Chulalongkorn University. It's administered from my faculty of Political Science.
Yes,
Please.
indeed. So I'm not sure if you've had a chance to have a look at the papers this morning, but the Tatmadaw yesterday announced, I guess, the first sort of admission that 10 so-called Bengali terrorists were killed, and that local villagers were also involved in the murder, and creation of mass graves in Rakhine State. So what is your kind of feeling about this? Is the Tatmadaw finally kind of like feeling a bit of a bite in sort of having to respond to international scrutiny? Or is this kind of like a way to reclaim the narrative and kind of be like, look, we're taking control of this and we're launching an investigation. Don't worry, guys. What are your thoughts on this announcement?
Two very short questions, very different. The first one, the special economic zone of Chokyu is located in Arakan State, and it's the entry point for the economic and energy corridor for China. So is this a concern for China, and would that have an impact on the way China would behave toward that crisis in the future? And second one, completely different. I've heard rumors or voices that Daesh would be acting or influencing in the Rohingya, in the Rakhine region. Is it voices, is it rumors, or is there any basis for that?
My question is that relationship between the peace process of Myanmar as a whole and this issue. We as a Myanmar citizen felt peace process is also very important for our change. Without peace process as a whole, the country will be ruined for another 60 years, we don't know. So, my question is, how this issue can affect on the peace process as a whole, because peace process needs international support as well. Because many international attentions are focused on this issue, they might have a chance lose attention on the whole process. And I think in terms of systemic discrimination, improving the peace process and also national debate, as Ms. Suggested, national debate can happen only after all divisions are solved through the peace process. So peace process is, I think, should pay attention in terms of contributing to this this problem. And also maybe second question, what are the challenges to implement the recommendation of Kofi Annan Commission so far? And what will be the Tatmadaw opinion right now? Because this is also important to consider. I agree personally, this is a really good recommendation.
First one about the role of the China and India. I think that we can see that in this conflict, we heard not a lot from the two governments, and they try to keep kind of reserved position and not to condemn the Myanmar government on this, and that may be a clever position to look at this. Second, about the peace process and the conflict in Rohingya conflict. From discussion with some local academics in Myanmar, they said that this will of course delay the peace process settlement, but they disagree that the Rohingya problem should be included in the existing peace process because that will be more complicated. And for this, we need to understand that the status of Rohingya as a new ethnic group, although the Madam Ambassador mentioned that it is included in after independence, while the other ethnic groups have their own state and they are indigenous, they have their own language, they have their own armed force. Rohingya is not an indigenous in that sense. They are all immigrants and they don't have their armed group, and they speak the language which is not Rohingya language because they speak Bengali with Chittagonian accent, and that's something quite complicated. So they can become an ethnic group in a new sense, but not in the old sense. And with that, how we or even Myanmar government can cope with this new category of ethnicity. And my third comment will be on overall sanction. I disagree with three things. I disagree with the Western media for their reporting, because I think that it is not comprehensive and it is not insightful and misleading. I disagree with the term genocide and ethnic cleansing, because that is too strong, and that's not the intention of the Tatmadaw, to erase the Rohingya from the map or from this world. And if you follow Tatmadaw's leader, on internet, on online media. He has a big, huge, more than 1 million followers who agree with him that what the Tatmadaw did in this case of the Rohingya crisis was more or less accepted. So the view from inside and the view from outside are not the same. And with that, if you continue to report that from the outsider's view, it will be distorting. And what we need to learn more is to listen and to learn from what happened inside. And the third thing that is sanction. I think that sanction will not be very, very fruitful for the situation. Sanction has been done again and again. And with that, now Myanmar is what we call hybrid democracy. One leg with the Tatmadaw and the other leg with the NLD. And with the two legs, we know that the Tatmadaw is leading. The attack into Rakhine state after the insurgency into the police post was done by the Tatmadaw without any consultation with the government or with anything. And it is considered as internal security. So it is the role of the Tatmadaw to do that. And with that, if you think that that's unaccepted and you want to sanction it, it will go nowhere. What we need to do now is to consider what should be the role of the track 2. How about the existing civil society in Myanmar? That can be the node of peace. I heard that Pangku, which is a kind of umbrella NGOs for all NGOs, is blacklisted now because they support the acceptance of Rohingya. Okay, so with that, this is the kind of thing that we should consider for possible solution.
Thanks. Okay, my turn. I'll keep this really tight. I'd like to answer them all, but I'll pick, maybe confine myself to 3 or 4, because I know my colleagues down there have a view on this as well, but it's a very good point you brought up about this mysterious, sudden admission by the military, the Tatmadaw, that there were irregularities, even rules of engagement broken by this sort of discovery of mass grave of 10 what they're calling Bengali terrorists, but which were clearly just some villagers. This came out yesterday or yesterday, I think. But the subtext to all of this, we think, and I know Kavi or Laetitia will have theories, relates to this very controversial case now of the 2 Reuters journalists who are detained, and yesterday we heard they were going to be prosecuted for national secrets. So I think that what's clear is that these journalists were working on this case and had some dynamite information evidence of this massacre that took place in a village, and there is clearly some linkage where the Tatmadaw feels it's going to preempt. But I mean, honestly, to actually come out and admit that there was irregular engagement by the murder of Bengali terrorists, when this comes from an army where the Commander-in-Chief on September the 7th or whatever proudly told the world that they had killed 380 Bengali terrorists. So why would they sort of admit that it's not good to kill 10 more? So that's one to watch, I think. And related to that, I think, is your question there of the what the Tatmadaw is really thinking, and the whole question about the radicalisation, this argument that there is a contagion effect and IS and Al-Qaeda or other groups will move in on these desperate Rohingya. In fact, I mean, they did manage to mount another attack recently, last week, as you might have seen, which was an ambush of a military convoy. Again, 10 men, 10 to 20, using extremely crude weapons, homemade IEDs. So far, we have seen absolutely no evidence of sophisticated weaponry. They're attacking the targets with machetes, sharpened sticks, and old firearms. And a lot of them are dying as a result. And I think it's a long way off an Al-Qaeda or IS trained or funded operation. They clearly do not have great funds or resources. So, and finally on Chao Pu, which is another good question because it goes to the heart of China's role in all of this, and there's not time to talk about it here, but I think China is really evolving its role with Myanmar, as seen in the peace process as well. But in Rakhine State, one should never forget that China has huge stakes and interest in stability in Rakhine State, because there are 2 oil and gas pipelines running from the Rakhine coast right through to Kunming. It's an absolute lifeline for China. They are putting a lot of money into the development of Chaopu, an industrial zone, and that's actually under huge negotiation right now, but it's clearly in China's interest not to have the state going up in flames. Do they mind that Rohingya have been cleared out? Well, if it's stable, I don't think they care either way, but they do want to see stability, so they have tried to intervene unusually or help the process between Bangladesh and Myanmar on the repatriation agreement, but I don't think they've gotten very far on that.
Well, I think ASEAN do what ASEAN has been doing, use quiet diplomacy, trying to talk and find consensus. And I think this year, as I said earlier, Singapore will be very, very active. And one of the issues that really cause concern is the one that I think Gwen just mentioned, the possibility of Rakhine become a new hotbed or sanctuary for extremists. This is a serious concern, and I think ASEAN want to make sure that the engagement will be positive, but I don't want to give you the impression that the ASEAN will just jump in. I did mention that under the chairmanship of Singapore is a very wise country. The way they engage, they will make sure, because if you look at the history of ASEAN engagement with external issue and problems, Singapore feature large in organizing the idea. So this time you will see that. So I think you will see a much more, what do you call, a multiple mutual respect and collective activity. I think that's one of the things I want to give the answer. I agree with Dr.Supang on the answer, including Gwen on the media. But the role of media in reporting both locals and foreign is far more complicated. And I think it will take hours to discuss, but I don't think I have time to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to start out by thanking the ambassador of Bangladesh for what she said. For us as a commission, the perspective of Bangladesh has been very important, and the role of your colleague, Ambassador Sufiur Rahman in Yangon has been invaluable to us. I think also if you look at what's been happening in Bangladesh, some of the things that your government has very quickly put into place are really excellent. One of the first things that was done, for example, was to set up a registration system. And in record time, more than 600,000 people were actually registered. Some of the Rohingya were actually proud to be able to show an identity card that they'd never had in their lives. So I think a lot of positive things can be done. It's a very difficult situation for Bangladesh, but we're very grateful as a commission for your cooperation with us. The peace process was mentioned, and whether Rakhine State shouldn't be part of the peace process, or at least the situation of Rohingya. I don't think that's going to be possible if you consider the present way of thinking about the peace process. And I only have to contrast, of course, the crimes that were committed by ARSA deserve to be punished. And they killed a number of security personnel, and that's a very serious matter. At the same time, however, you have operating in that area the Arakan army, which used to be more over on the Kachin side, but now they've come down to the Butadang Chin area. I have the figures for the last 6 months of 2016 alone. They killed over 200 Tatmadaw soldiers. hardly anything in the media about it. So it shows that there is a particular interest in the Rohingya situation, and that there's a great reluctance to make their situation part of the bigger peace process. Talk about ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity. I think you cannot say that it did not take place. Neither can you say much about how serious it was until proper investigations has been done. And once again, I come back to this situation of non-access to the critical areas that need to be investigated, particularly access for the UN fact-finding commission that is trying to find out, to establish what had happened, to advise the UN General Assembly on it. But as I said, you have to be very, just as much as you have to be careful to say it is ethnic cleansing or it is genocide, you also have to be careful to say it is not genocide or it is not ethnic cleansing, because we simply do not have the data. Finally, because you, my dear colleague, mentioned the census of 2014, it is true that the Rohingya did not take part for reasons that they think were valid in the census. On the other hand, what's very important to bear in mind, as far as I know, the Rohingya are the most frequently enumerated people in the world. Every year, each Rohingya family is put in its village, in front of every house. The entire family is assembled. The cattle are also assembled. They're all photographed. And this happens every year. It is done by the General Affairs Department and of the government. And all these photos are available in the Mangdang district offices. If you don't appear on one of these pictures for 1 year, you immediately no longer exist. So it's a very strict system in Rohingya, although they dislike it, do take part in it. And it's critical that it is suggested to the government of Myanmar that it uses these clear records that they have of everyone who was living there before they fled to Bangladesh. Because they have that. They can very easily verify who was living there and who was not living there. So it's not only a matter, it shouldn't only be a matter of people being allowed to return who have documents, or people who are Hindu or otherwise, but I mean, it is the responsibility in my country and in many other countries. If I lose all my house burns down, my papers are lost, I cannot convince people who I am. I go to the government and they help me out. They sort me out. That is what the government of Myanmar also should do, because it has all that data, and that's a very specific suggestion that needs to be brought into the deliberation of the return process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a lot on the table here. There's no big answer, but I think a lot to think about. One of the major issues, I think, is the access. And what's happening there needs to be more accessible. We'll have more on this later on in the year. For the time being, please join me in thanking the speakers who have shared their expertise and their time with us. Dr.Supang, Gwen Robinson, Ambassador Laetitia Van Den Assum, and then Ms.Kavi Chongkittavorn. Thank you very much. And